We are here tonight to have a chat with Jeanette Chia of Hacker Exchange and Waihang Fong. So before I begin, I'd like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land on which we are meeting this evening and pay my respects to elders past, present and emerging. So I'm going to leave it over to the experts to have this discussion with you. Jeanette, Waihang, welcome. Take it away.
Thank you, Ingrid. So pumped to be having this conversation, and welcome back to the people that are probably either eating their dinner or they've decided to come and hang out with us instead of watching Netflix tonight. Really, really good to have you, your company. Waihang, thanks for joining us. Welcome back to Melbourne virtually.
Thanks, Jeanette. Thanks for having me here. It's a pleasure to always be able to connect with this crowd.
Absolutely. Now, just a little bit of context for those watching. My name is Jeanette Chia. I'm co-founder and CEO of Hacker Exchange, and my team's going to have the pleasure of hosting you through the hackathon over the Friday and Saturday of this festival. And I'm super, super pumped to introduce Waihang. He is the co-founder and chieftain of StoreHub, which is one of Southeast Asia's fastest growing technology company. So they're essentially an operating system for retailers and restaurants, helping business owners grow. You've got hundreds of employees now, and I know that like teamwork and culture is really key for you. So I can't wait to cover some of that stuff. And just a couple of other great things about Waihang is that he's in Malaysia right now, but he spent 10 years here in Melbourne. Waihang, whereabouts in Melbourne did you live?
Well, I started out living in Uni Lodge on Swanston. So
no way.
As a student, yeah, absolutely. Then I moved out to West Melbourne, up to Templestowe, and then Bulleen, and I still have a house in Wantirna. I still have a house in Arcata. So yeah.
Truly a local. And so apart from that, you spent time in Singapore and Shanghai. You were actually voted one of the best young entrepreneurs in 2011 by Startup Smart. Is that right? That's incredible.
Yeah, I was very surprised when I actually got that award. Didn't expect it at all. Yeah.
Way too modest. Well, it's a pleasure to have you, and it's my absolute pleasure to be having this chat.
Cool.
Can we start by maybe telling us a little bit about your journey studying across a number of countries? I mean, we're talking to lots of international students during this festival, and they might have had a similar experience. Love to hear where you've been and what you've done and what you experienced through your studies.
Yeah, I think most of my life I've been an international student. If you actually count up the years, I first left Malaysia, where I grew up in, at the age of 12. So I was 12 years old when I went to Singapore. I was what they call an ASEAN scholar. So the Singapore government paid for my 4 years of high school. I stayed in a hostel, got into a lot of trouble. Yeah, I got into a lot of trouble hacking computers, right? So that's kind of like a thing for me. I love technology. And one of the things that really we loved doing when we were younger was playing a lot of games. And so we played a lot of StarCraft. But the problem with that when we were in high school was that they used to charge us like $5 an hour to use the computers. And that was just way too much money, right? And so we hacked the cash card system and we played for free. And I got into a lot of trouble for that. So anyways, I spent 4 years in Singapore. And I went to Melbourne after that, because even though they had offered me a scholarship, I didn't do particularly well in school. But my mom was like, I think you wouldn't thrive in the Singapore system. I think it's better off that you go to Australia, which is, it doesn't have that same rigidity and that same kind of rote memory style of learning. And so I did. So I went to Trinity College in Melbourne, and subsequently Melbourne University. So I was there in Melbourne. I did my studies over 4 years. I did fail 5 subjects.
You just kept failing subjects because you wanted to keep hanging out in Melbourne. Is that right?
Yeah, I'm not sure about that. Funny story. It's a true story. My dad did not know that I had failed 5 subjects in uni until many years later. He actually found out I failed all those subjects at uni by reading about it in a newspaper. It's true.
Nicely
it's
done.
just ridiculous. Yeah. So at that time, he probably didn't care already. But back when it happened, my mom was like, "You don't tell your dad anything." Anyway, so I was in Melbourne for 5 years as a student, and then I started an e-commerce business there. So in total, I was 10 years in Melbourne. Then I went to Shanghai, again as an international student, but this time for language. So I learned Chinese or Mandarin, as some people understand it as, for about 6 months in school. So I was 26 years old at the time. I was surrounded by really interesting people. There were Korean mothers in their 40s and 50s, as well as Kazakhstani teenagers as young as 14 or 15. So it's a very wide range in my classroom, and there was the language. So I loved it. I love China. I spent almost two years in China before coming back to Malaysia.
Okay, fantastic.
Yeah,
and
so,
I mean sorry, keep going.
Yeah, just many years of being an international student everywhere.
Yeah, well, I mean, it sounds like you're not just a student of the actual universities. You're there to sort of absorb the culture and the language. And what I really like about that story as well is even just the diversity of people that you've probably come across during that time, which is really incredible. Now, I'm going to take this moment to ask the audience to please, if you have questions during this chat, pop them into the Q&A down the bottom of your screen. Also, if you do want to make any comments or just kind of leave some reactions to anything we're talking about, drop it in the chat and make sure you switch that to all panelists and attendees so we can see who's there. So just a quick aside to the audience who's joined us now, because I know there's a few extras that have come through. Now, the topic of this talk is about the impact of gaming on your approach to business. And you've already touched on the fact that you're a little bit of a hustler and a hacker getting into the back end of those StarCraft servers. Can you tell us a little bit about, where do you think that mindset came from that, hey, I'm going to try to get in and do something different, or get around a rule?
Yeah, look, I mean, I think, so there's two things to this, right? One is this competitive streak that I've always had as a kid. And just wanting to win and stuff, right? And so, and naturally, one of the things, I don't know if we make the best, friends to people, because the competitive people are not always the friendliest people. I remember I would have primary school friends who would come up to me many years later. I would say, "Why? How do you remember that time at basketball you threw the ball in my face and my nose started bled nonstop?"
Okay, I can't relate to that.
Yeah. So
okay. So your competitive nature was already quite strong from a child.
Yeah, absolutely. And I found a lot of expression of that through games. And whether that was in the computer games or sport, but more so in computer games, just simply because I had this knack for computers. And I think that could be traced back to the fact that my mom was a programmer, which was quite rare in this day. And my uncle was a programmer. So I had computers in my house since I was 3, and I've been playing around with computers from a very, very young age. So naturally, I kind of found expression of that kind of, I guess not attachment, but it's just that obsession with computers from a very young age. I remember telling my mom, I think I was 11 or 10. I said, "Mom, when I grow up, I want to marry a computer. That's what I would be doing." And my ambition. Sorry.
AI is very close to being able to allow you to do that. So if you just hang on for another 6 months or so, I'm sure someone will invent something for you.
I was ahead of my time. This was 1998 when I said stuff like that. And it was crazy. I think my ambition as a kid was to be the world's greatest hacker. Never quite got that. But these were kind of the thoughts I had as a kid, right? And so as I grew up, I found a lot of expression through games. And the way you kind of merge competitiveness and games is that in order to win, you're always trying to find that edge, right? The competitive edge. What are you going to do different, special, extra over your opponent to kind of beat them? And so I think that's kind of where the bending the rules stuff comes in, right? You're always trying to figure out, games are simply just a set of rules. Which rules can you figure out to bend better than your opponent can so that you actually win, right? So I think that's kind of the mindset that I've always had growing up.
Very cool. And I mean, do you have, I guess, a concrete business example of maybe a time where you did bend a rule or you got an edge over a competitor by doing something unexpected in business? Could you maybe give us an example of something like that?
Yeah, sure. So just perhaps my business which I started in Melbourne. I hear Ivan was on the show earlier, and he was one of my best friends back in Melbourne, and we started when I started the e-commerce business in Melbourne. We worked on it together, and so one of the things that we did was that we were wanting to compete with all of these telescope stores, right? There were all these telescope retailers all across Australia, and most of them were kind of they were operating offline, so they were primarily selling out of their physical stores, and e-commerce was still a very, very new thing then. And so one of the things that we did was that we knew that if we wanted to get sustainable revenue and traffic, we had to kind of be at the top of the search results when you were searching for telescopes or binoculars and stuff like that. And so today we know it as SEO, but back then it was, they kind of knew it as SEO as well, but it was kind of a gimmick, right? There were all these companies trying to charge you an arm and a leg for for their services to kind of
for the
get you at
mystery
top
of being
ranks.
at the top of Google,
Right.
right?
And then the best part is that when you ask them the question, what do you actually do? They're like, oh, well, it's a trade secret. You know? And you're
You
like,
didn't
oh,
like
yeah,
that rule, I
right.
bet.
No, I hated it. I was like, this is nonsense, right? And so we figured out that actually, there were a lot of things you could do. And some things were very clean and some things were kind of gray. And so we kind of always, and the challenge here is that how gray can you get without getting caught or without actually it jeopardizing you? It's not like there's nothing illegal in any of the things that we did. It's just that if you were caught or you did something that was crossed a line, Google would find out and penalize you, right? So it's kind of like this really cat and mouse game you're trying to play. And so yeah, that was one of the expressions. And so we ended up ranking number one for all the keywords that we wanted to rank for. And that became the business, right? Because that's free traffic. And so free traffic, if you convert it properly or you kind of drive it to the right funnels, you actually, that turns into revenue. So I think that's kind of like really the genesis of that business. Just really figure out which rules of the game that you're trying to play here. And in this case, the game was simply gaming the search results, right? Which rules can be banned, which rules can't be banned. Because the reality is if you're not thinking about banning the rules, you won't get there fast enough. So yeah.
That's right. If you're just following the same path as everyone else, you're just in a bit of a foot race. I really like the way you think about that. And I guess another sort of, thing about like using the gaming analogy, and you sort of already talked about this rule bending, but it's also a lot of strategy. You're planning quite far ahead to see, within the scope of this game, like where can I position myself next to take a new advantage? How has that played out in sort of the way that you think about games and business?
Yeah, so strategy is a really dirty word out here all the time because it's like a lot of people have all kinds of understanding of what it means. And I think for me, I pretty much defined it in the confines of gaming, right? Strategy is very simple. It's just understanding who your opponents are, what they're likely to do, and predicting a sort of future in the battles that you will fight in, and therefore preparing ahead of time based on your understanding of that future, what you're going to do and in order to win, right? So I think for us, that's pretty much how games function, right? The games that I used to play were generally competitive in nature, so it will be. What
were they mostly? What were your favorites?
I played a lot of games in my life, but I would say I was very serious at Dota. So I've been playing Dota since Melbourne, so almost 2006, 2005. So almost 15 years of history playing that game.
Wow.
Which I know someone asked if I still have time for gaming. I still do play Dota. I actually have a Dota coach.
You do not have a Dota coach, do you really?
I have a Dota coach. For any of the Dota hardcore people out there, he coaches one of the top 10 teams in the world right now. So he's like really, really good. And I'm a huge believer in kind of like that model of coaching, right? Like I think in order to get really good at something, it's really important that you have a coach. Like, it's just 10 times more efficient, more effective to get good at something. So I played that very competitively. And I think a lot of the lessons there were very much fundamentally centered around, okay, what are the 5 heroes that your opponent's going to pick? And what combination is that going to kind of like create in terms of strength and weaknesses, and therefore how are you going to adjust your strategy according to that? What heroes are you going to pick yourself? What items are going to be important? What timings, right? I think timings are a really, really key one. That the game has an early phase, a mid phase, and a late phase. It's important to understand our timing, right? Given the combination of heroes they have, which part of like, do you have an advantage in the early phase? Do you have an advantage in the mid phase? Do you have an advantage in the late phase? And working towards your win condition, right? So there's plenty of these things that are super relatable. I mean, these are still this exact same terminology that we use in our strategy meetings here in work. But it's literally lifted off some of the games that we've played.
I've never heard that term of a win condition before, but I think that's something I'm going to bring into my team. My team meetings is like, all right, guys, which phase of this section are we going to have a win condition? That's fantastic.
Yeah.
You mentioned sort of talking in your team meetings, and I noticed, on your website and on all your business copy, team is such a huge and important part of what you do, and you look about, you look for builders and people that are going to come and join you. Can you tell me a little bit about your approach to team building and what you look for in people?
So we have a framework for kind of like our recruitment process. It's called CH Cube. It comes from a book of the ideal. I think it's called the Ideal Team Player. That's the book that we kind of inherited these principles from. And really, CH Cube it's an acronym for 4 things. One is competency, humility, hungriness, and We adapted the last word. He called it like social intelligence or something. I prefer to call it HIP, kind of like the ability to engage, like,
I got it.
Yeah, you got it, right?
Like an X factor kind of thing.
Yeah, because CH, social intelligence, I mean, it just doesn't work. So CH cube is easier to remember. So I think that's kind of like our very basic but super important and super valuable framework for kind of how do we pick up good team members, right? And then from there, first thing we always do with every single person that joins the organization is that we give them the Clifford's Strengths Finder assessment to do. So just trying to get a sense of their strengths and their leanings. It's not a perfect tool, but it gives us an indication of, if we have to build an organization that relies on each other's strengths, what kind of leanings do people have and how do we use that understanding of each other to kind of build better organizations? Because at the end of the day, we're all very unique, right? And so like very much like heroes in that, Dota game and that team, the combination of people we have gives us an indication of what strategy works for us, right? Because, if you have a team full of shooters, right, you have a strategy centered around shooting. I'm using a basketball analogy now, right? If you have a team centered around very big people, then you might build a strategy around being able to muscle your way through to a win, right? So I think that's super important for us to kind of understand, okay, what are we working with and what's the best kind of game plan for what we have, right? I think that's super important.
So you almost treat your team as, the champions that you might have to pick and put into the game at any point.
Well, I guess you're using the word champions here in relation to heroes, right? As opposed to like
heroes,
top. Yeah, got it. Yeah, but one of the things definitely I think with teams that I find the reality is that we, as startups, it's unlikely that we'll be able to work with so-called the world's best people who are already fully developed. And probably ourselves, when I first started, or even where I am right now, I wouldn't consider myself world-class in any way as an executive or as an entrepreneur. I think there's still plenty of room to kind of grow and kind of like improve in. I myself have a business coach, so I've had a coach for the last 4 years. She's based out of Palo Alto in California, and so she's coached many startups and many Fortune 500 company execs. And so I find myself just really being engaged in this journey of growing. And I think the reality is that when we build teams and think about teams, it's really important to recognize how do we bring out the best in people as opposed to just thinking about putting together the best kind of team. Because the reality is that, that's most likely what you're going to be doing most of the time, trying to bring out the best in people.
Absolutely. And as you said, sort of understanding the kind of skill that you're hiring into the team, because if you're not conscious about that, you might accidentally skew your strategy towards something which you hadn't meant to do. So I think that's a trip for new players, I'd say. And even for people who might be joining the hackathon tomorrow and sort of putting into teams, having a think about who you want on your team is a great piece. And I understand, like even on that perspective, team diversity and the way that people think and communicate. There was a great anecdote in the podcast that you did, which I listened to, around having, even just a female member of your game team with a different kind of communication style, which helped lift your team to another level of performance. Can you tell us a bit about that?
Yeah, so one of the things that we were most proud of when I was gaming in Australia, in Melbourne, we actually won tournaments in Melbourne, Dota tournaments, right? We won the teams, and we were very proud, not because of winning the tournaments, but because we believed at the time we had the best female Dota player in Australia in our team. And the reason why we could make that claim to fame is simply because, well, she was the only female Dota player in the tournaments that we were playing. She was the only. We were pioneers in that time, right? And the most amazing thing about that time was that our team did not consist of the best individual talent. In fact, if you actually assess honestly and objectively the level of playing, like our playing level, right? Like our skill individually, we were not the best. We were probably like top 20 or 10%, of kind of like the scene. But what made our team good and what allowed us to win tournaments was that we uniquely identified that her role, she her name is Dina, the girl that was on our team, and she was really very focused on making sure that we communicated well. Like we would generally if you think about the typical stereotype of an Asian male gamer sitting around a computer, they don't talk a lot, right? They just kind of like just heads down looking at a screen. But Dina was always constantly encouraging us and pushing us to communicate and over communicate a lot more. And of course, these days in business and work, we talk about the value of over communicating as leaders.
Absolutely.
And the value of over communicating as teams. But back then, this was not like something that we learned in an MBA or anything, right? We were like just little first, second year uni students. And so I think just that value of having her have such a focus on that, something that's natural to her and something that she sees as super important, that really helped us kind of like win out over other teams, just simply because our teamwork through our over communicating was better than other teams.
That's fantastic. And I'm a huge fan of over communication, as anyone that I work with would be able to say. And it's, I think such a great way to make sure, particularly in this remote environment, keeping everyone, on the same mission and pointing in the same direction. Now, you mentioned a line there about Dina, and shout out to Dina, by the way, around the fact that she was leaning into something that was really natural to her. And, speaking to yourself, and you're this amazing tech founder, and you obviously grown up wanting to marry computers, it's very easy for us to assume that you've just been like deep in tech your entire life. But you actually didn't study technology, did you? That wasn't your core sort of, course.
Yeah. So I think everyone expected me to, like they all thought I would go and, do a degree in computer science, but I didn't want to be a programmer for the rest of my life. So I took like a 180 degree turn and I said, okay, I'm just going to do an arts degree in media and comms. And I double majored in history and philosophy of science.
Wow.
I absolutely hated my media major. I did
really?
not do well at all. Yeah, I didn't like, I was like, oh, it's so boring. But my history and philosophy of science major, I absolutely loved. And I found the process so engaging. And I think it's really interesting because over the years, I've gotten a chance, especially in my time in China, when I was kind of post-studying Chinese, I actually did some work for the Chinese government. And I actually kind of like traveled a lot in China, and I got to meet some really interesting people. And some of the people I met was actually this guy, his name was Brian Lee, and he was one of Jack Ma's right-hand men that he had brought back from the US to kind of help build Alibaba. And this guy, Brian, was sharing with me about the kind of like the difference about the Alibaba DNA and what made them a different company. And he talked a lot about how Alibaba saw themselves first as a tech company, as an e-commerce company, but secondly, more importantly, they saw themselves as a company built on philosophy as opposed to the idea of management. So I got really curious about this idea. What does it mean to build a company on philosophy? What does it mean to have those kinds of ideas enter the culture, the DNA of your company, right? And a lot of the time we talk about it in terms of culture and our core values and our vision and our mission, but they talk about philosophy. So it's really fascinating. And I think one of the major differences I saw was a huge emphasis on storytelling, right? And that's kind of like the difference between philosophy and just general management principles. That management principles are very much, okay, you follow this principle, it's got wisdom, it's going to do you some good, right? Whereas a lot of philosophical kind of leading comes from the perspective of how do we tell stories that people resonate with and kind of derive the lessons from. So I thought that was fascinating, and I still try to kind of like,
Well, it's almost like, the great storytellers develop a bit of a company mythology or an organization mythology that almost get told and retold to new hires in the company. And I think that's a really, it's almost like a spiritual way to do business, isn't it? It's something quite interesting that you don't find in a typical business school book.
Yeah, absolutely.
Very fascinating. And I guess, when you first started, working in entrepreneurship, and you didn't actually mean necessarily to design yourself as being this great founder, what did you think you were going to do? Like, what did you sort of imagine that your career was going to look like?
I thought I was going to work in an IT company doing marketing.
Selling software or something?
Yeah. Oh, I don't know. Like, I mean, back then, it's a very different landscape back in 2007, right? But that was what I thought I would be. I'll get out, look for a job. I actually have not gone for a single interview in my life. I jumped straight into kind of like that e-commerce business. But yeah, that was what I thought I would be.
Yeah. And did you sort of at any point when you were jumping into starting, your first business, OzHut, did you think that, like, what am I doing? Like, am I doing this deliberately? Or was it just kind of like you just kind of fell into it and just kept following the pathway? Can you take us a bit back to that mindset that you had when you kicked it off?
Yeah. So I kind of like just stumbled into it simply because I was kind of taking my, post-studies gap, kind of few months trying to figure out what I'm going to do. But my uncle was like, hey, you don't bum around. You must come and help me out and put a few things up on eBay. He had this small little gift shop out in Box Hill. So I was just literally listing stock on eBay to sell. but I got really good at listing stuff on eBay to sell, whether that's writing the descriptions, gaming the system, figuring all that stuff out. And eventually that kind of led to, some traction. And when the decision came to like, do I jump into this or do I kind of like go look for a job? My mom was actually pretty pivotal in all this. She was actually encouraging me to try it out. And so I thought, okay, why not? This is technology. I love it. My, 3.5 years of writing nonstop during my media degree, that would be useful. Why not, right? Let's do something different. I didn't realize I would pay myself a salary of $1,000 for 18 months, which had many, many problems there. But yeah.
It's very dedicated of you.
Yeah, well, my ex-girlfriend at the time, she was like, do you want to go to Sydney, for holiday? And I looked at my bank account and there's like 3 digits in there. And I was like, maybe not. And I always joke that's probably why she was my ex-girlfriend.
Well, when the chemistry's not right, and I mean, if she didn't have any bites and wires, then clearly not the person for you. Now, I've got some really interesting audience questions coming through, so I'm going to throw to some of those. But
Sure.
First of all, there's the question around, I guess, you innovate a lot, and how do you find that inspiration to keep doing that despite all of the crazy competition that's sort of nipping at your heels? And I guess a related question is, how does all that competition and movement, in Southeast Asia relate to that in Melbourne, and what are you seeing in kind of those two? So sort of a 2-part question there for you. I'm merging things. Sorry, guys.
Yeah. So I think innovation is a really kind of like a word that people have mystified. I think it's actually really not that difficult. I mean, I think it's really the concept of taking proven principles across domains and somehow putting them together in a way that kind of has not been tried before. So one of the books that completely changed my life and perspective on these things was, I believe it was Daniel Pink, A Whole New Mind. And he wrote about how that the innovators of the future or the people that will create value, he didn't use the word innovators, but he used the word value, right? And he said that the people that will create the most value in a world of automation and computers and outsourcing are the ones that are able to kind of cross left brain, right brain, kind of thinking. So if you have a lot of highways between your two brains, you're able to kind of take things that are typically very much segregated to the artsy world and bring them into the sciencey world and go, okay, no, we can kind of like make them work together. I'm oversimplifying here. I think it's
you do realize you've just described hacking your own brain. So like that's basically exactly what you described. It's like coming out of the boundaries.
True. So if you traditionally identify yourself as a very sciencey person, or like an accountant or scientist, or go and do some art classes, right? Go and do dancing. Go and learn to play a musical
improv.
Like yeah, absolutely. I love drama. Drama is one of my favorite subjects back in Trinity College in Melbourne. And these are the things like, if you're able to kind of like build these highways, that's where innovation happens. You are able to kind of connect the dots between something that's completely not seen in a particular industry, and to bring that thought from, say, architecture into art or into business or into e-commerce, or to bring a thought in engineering into art or into music, whatever it is, right? So I think innovation to me is that kind of work of being able to connect the dots.
Yeah, and I really love that, because it kind of, it just adds on to sort of your point before about having that diversity in a team, because clashing those thoughts in a team just brings it all to a whole new level. So
absolutely.
Awesome.
And so I think the beauty in Southeast Asia is that, we've seen a lot of how the world has evolved, whether that's in China or in Australia or in the US or in Europe. And Southeast Asia is kind of this nascent ecosystem that's just trying to get its feet going for some of the technology stuff that we're doing. But there's a lot of things that are very different, right? So there's a lot of different conditions in Southeast Asia. So it's not as simple as copying and pasting what you've seen that works. It's really, you have to kind of connect the dots. Like in this kind of different scenario, what is needed to actually truly create value for the people that you're trying to serve? So I think that's kind of like the basis for innovation in Southeast Asia, and that's how we stay competitive. It's not as simple as saying, let's copy someone wholesale. It's really, you have to really connect the dots and kind of, two different realms kind of thing.
Yeah, so you can take like the best practice from the world and sort of apply it specifically to the needs of that market. Yeah, and sorry, the connection question was, and how does that culture of e-commerce growth and sort of the operating system work that you're doing compare to what's happening here in Melbourne and Australia? Do you sort of see any kind of competition or what's going on?
I honestly have not kept like too much up to date with the Melbourne ecosystem in terms of e-commerce.
Have you just been a bit busy?
A little bit, but I do have a lot of friends who are still there, and I think from what I understand, like the reality is that one of the biggest challenges that we had, here in Southeast Asia was just talent, and I think one of the most interesting things that we saw was being able to kind of like bring talent from all over the world, work with people from China, Philippines, Thailand. I think when I was in Melbourne, I felt like, we didn't have that diversity of talent. So I'm not sure if that impacted kind of like the way that e-commerce grew. But I don't know if there's too much of a difference in the e-commerce ecosystem. I'm really the worst person to ask that question. I think Ivan would have been able to answer that question better.
Yeah, well, we can always we can grab Ivan. So, I mean, I've got a really great question here from Keshav, who's referring back to your Dota vibes. And now I learned a new term today from your podcast, which was actions per minute, and I didn't know that was a thing. But I feel like I'd be really good at that because it's like how quickly. Right. So, do you think that sort of like quick, fast-paced decision-making in Dota and your actions per minute score, has that impacted your real-life business and the way you make decisions in real life?
Jeanette, I will also qualify that there are two types of players in that kind of competitive space. The ones that both types of players have very high actions per minute, but one has more meaningful actions per minute than the other. So there's some players
and the other one's just bashing the keyboard,
just spamming the keys, right? And I think that, I mean, I have a point here, right? Which is that it is important to think about what is the difference between a top 10 player in the world and one that is say in the top 1,000, and that difference is simply in how meaningful the actions are. And I think when it comes to being able to kind of play really well at anything and any kind of decision making, that's why we talk about experience being important, right? Because there's some things that you just like in gaming theory we call it muscle memory, right? You just know somehow it's important to click like that, and because you're making these decisions at 200 actions per minute, meaning 7 actions per second. Is that right? They do the math right? No. 3 actions per second, right? That's a lot of actions per second. That's a lot of decisions you're making every single second, right? And so I think it's really impossible for you to be able to kind of like at that point of time figure out whether you did the right thing or not. It's kind of like it's down to that muscle memory and experience. And so when it comes to like decision making in work and business, oftentimes I would say this to everyone, that the most important thing we did when we were gaming was not the gaming itself. It was the hours that we spent after the games were played, huddled around one computer and like analyzing the game and going, hey, Wai Hong, why did you miss that action right there? You stupid like noob. And basically we would keep pointing these things out, and you're like, oh, right. In retrospect, or reflecting on the game and watching those replays, I think the pro sports people will always say, watching tape, right? They're always watching tape. And so I think watching replays and reflecting it's something that's very common in pro sports culture, but it's not in work and business. And that's something that we do and we emphasize in our companies, because we recognize that reflection is how you actually make your actions per minute more meaningful. It's when you think about, post game, and then it kind of like, it's ingrained there. And the next time you have to make those decisions, you kind of like have a point of reference. And sometimes you don't even think about it. It just subconsciously enters your decision-making process.
Absolutely. And I really think that's a cool way to think about it, that the post game is just as important as the actual game. And that's where, and that's where a lot of like growth, and, even from, if you think about the agile concept and agile business, people do retrospectives, which is kind of the same kind of thing you're describing. Absolutely. Now I know we've got some more questions, but we don't have heaps of time left. There's a couple of really quick ones. Let's do a super quick question. Do you have an opinion about the future of Twitch, from Anne?
Bright.
Right. Okay.
I think it's a great platform. I know there are a lot of other platforms trying to do what Twitch is doing, but the biggest thing that makes these platforms meaningful is community. And as long as these guys continue to develop those communities and look after their content creators, I think they'll continue to thrive and grow.
Fantastic. And I think that's a great sort of message for anyone building something new, is really to take care of the people you serve and understand those. Now, I've picked up so many gems from this conversation, and I think you and I could probably grab a beer and talk for like 3 hours, and that would be super fun. And maybe that's why, you have 2-hour long podcasts. But, I guess like what I've kind of, taken from this is like, have a think about predicting your future battles and predicting the future battles you might have and how you can position yourself for that win. The power of storytelling to bring your team along the journey and to get, everyone on board. Even the best of us have a coach. And I think that, coaching and sort of having that learning mindset is something you really demonstrate. And I really and finally this post game to choose meaningful actions. And I think that actually answers Swan's question, which is how do you choose in a pool of ideas? I guess it is to have some of that time to reflect and choose your next move. But no, this has been fantastic. Do you have anything you would say to, yourself back when you were at Uni Melbourne or at Trinity College and, staying up late, finishing assignments, or what would you say to Wai Hong back then?
Oh, I don't know. It's a hard question simply because I feel like I'm one of those, I don't think I've lived, in any way. I'm not sure if I would have changed too many things in the past. I guess maybe telling myself to, I think one thing I could have done differently was I don't think we pushed ourselves high enough to win those tournaments. I think we got a few under our belt and we're like, yeah, we're content. And I think that was a result of different people kind of like moving on in life and different things.
Mm-hmm.
But I felt like I should have gone harder. Like I think that would have been a better story. I had a richer experience and probably learned more then. And I think one of the things that I definitely appreciate about gaming as well, like there are lessons you can learn in small team gaming, so like leading a team of 5, but there are also quite really tremendous lessons you can learn from like leading a guild of say 100 people or 50 people, which I think would have been valuable. So I would definitely have had probably more kind of like lessons from taking my gaming beyond what it was back then. So yeah, go more hardcore.
So it's a pretty good story, but you would have just wanted it to be a little longer and then have a few.
I would have wanted it to be a bit more like intense.
Okay. Yeah. Okay. I understand. And I guess a more exciting question is like, what's happening next? What are the big milestones that you're planning for, either in your personal life or in the business? What are we heading towards?
Yeah. So I've been back in Malaysia for almost 7-8 years now, and I've been away from Australia. I gave up my PR a couple of years ago simply because I simply believe that when I'm still young and dumb and I have energy to give, I should give it to a region where there's a lot more problems to solve. I think Australia is just a really beautiful, amazing country. Not as many problems as the countries that I'm part of right now. And so I think that's really the goal for me is to how do I, having had all this experience of living in all these different countries, be able to connect the dots in so many different ways, kind of channel all of that energy, whether in personal kind of like mentoring or in the business impact that we have across the countries that we are in. How do we build something big and, but more importantly, meaningful? Because high actions doesn't always necessarily create good meaning. So yeah.
Great. Well, let me know if we can help at all with that and helping you sort of to build additional meaning across all those incredible countries. This has been absolutely fantastic. We're going to get kicked off stage because I know that there is a party coming up. Wai Hong Fong, thank you so much. People in the crowd, if you wouldn't mind giving us a little bit of a digital something in the chat or a bit of a hands up, that would be great because it's really hard for us to know how this is landing when we're staring at just the screen. But I'm just going to give you a round of applause.
Thank you.
On behalf of the audience. And thank you so much for all of your insights and your time.